Great. Thank you. Yeah. How's it going, everyone? How did everybody get here today? I want to start off by asking, did people drive to get here? Anybody take a bus? No. Anybody take a train? Any kind of public transportation? So my name is Jaqi Cohen. I live in New York City. And because I live in New York City, I depend very heavily on mass transportation. And because I live in New York City, I enjoy nothing more than to complain about my commute every day. So I'm going to do that for you now. So to get up to Albany, I had to hop on the A train at the Hoyt-Schermerhorn stop in Brooklyn. I took the A train up to 34th Street Penn Station, where I hopped on an Amtrak train. Took the Amtrak about 2.5 hours up to Albany, where I hopped in a cab and headed uptown. But let's say by the way, this is me on the subway, age 12 subway, Jaqi. But what if I needed to use a wheelchair? Would it be as easy getting up to Albany as it was just hopping on the train and heading up here? Probably not. First of all, I wouldn't be able to even use the subway station that I live closest to because it doesn't have an elevator. So I would have to continue on an additional about half mile to get to the closest accessible subway stop. I would have to take an elevator down to the subway platform, get on the subway, take another elevator up to Penn Station, take another elevator down to the Amtrak platform, take the train 2.5 hours up to Albany, and then I would have had to either pre-reserve a vehicle to get me uptown or have pre-applied for Albany's STAR Paratransit program. So needless to say, paratransit, or transit in general, does not prioritize people with disabilities. I think it's pretty easy to say. But what if we lived in a world where our transit systems were more accessible? What would that look like? We live in an incredibly technologically advanced time where we hear about new and exciting types of transportation innovations each day. I'm constantly hearing about driverless cars, high-speed rail. Elon Musk is the CEO of Tesla and of SpaceX, and he is talking about sending rocket ships to Mars, right? Mars. Like, nothing I suggest today is going to be nearly as sexy as sending a rocket ship to Mars. I apologize in advance. But it makes me wonder if we're thinking about transit in this way, we're thinking about how we're going to get there in such an innovative new way. Why not take a step back and look at the transit systems that we already have and think about how could we make them more inclusive? How could we make it so everybody can use them? So let's start with the New York City subway system. New York City subway system is one of the largest transit systems in the world. There are 469 subway stations in New York City, and it is the preferred mode of transportation for most New York City residents. And understandably so, right? It's fast, it's reasonably reliable. You can trust that the subway is going to get you where you need to go. But only 22% of the subway stations in New York City have elevators. And with constant outages and with mechanical problems, this number tends to be, in actuality, much less. So that's a problem, right? 22% of our subway stations cannot be or are accessible by elevator. But what would it look like if we had a more accessible subway system? What would it look like if every single subway station had an elevator? Well, if I depended on a wheelchair to get around New York City, I would have access to the closest subway station to my home. If we had elevators at each one of our subway stations, my friend Paul, for example, who is ambulatory and uses a wheelchair, wouldn't have to throw his wheelchair down the steps of a subway station while he climbs on his knees holding onto a banister to get down to the subway platform. And while I've seen him do this, and it's absolutely amazing to watch, I don't think anybody here blames him for not wanting to crawl on his hands and knees in the New York City subway. But it would also mean that that new parent who's pushing around a subway stroller wouldn't have to wait at the bottom of the stairs for a benevolent stranger to come by and help him carry that stroller up the stairs, right? It would mean that a cyclist who had a biking accident, who broke his foot, wouldn't have to risk breaking every other bone in his body, hobbling down the stairs on crutches, right? We would all benefit from these changes. But, installing elevators into subways is expensive, it takes a long time. What about buses? New York City has 100% wheelchair accessible fleet of buses. Every single bus in New York City is wheelchair accessible. They each have an elevated lift to enable passengers to get on and off the bus more easily. And New York City has the biggest bus system in the entire country. But the problem is that these wheelchair lifts on these buses are part of the New York City bus system. And the New York City bus system is notoriously slow, it's unreliable, and I mean, it is slow as hell. You can race a crosstown bus across Manhattan at noon on foot and expect to get there before the bus does. Like, that is how slow I'm talking about. So it's no wonder that New Yorkers are abandoning the bus altogether. Bus ridership rates have decreased tremendously in the past decade alone. People are opting to walk up to a mile to get to the closest subway station so that they can avoid the bus altogether, understandably so. But for those of us who can't even get into the subway, right? The bus is our only option. So for better service or for worse, many New Yorkers, those with limited mobility, are stuck using the bus no matter what. So in order to make the bus more accessible, we truly would have to address some of these system-wide problems. So what would a better, more equitable, accessible bus system look like? Well, certainly one that allows all-door boarding on the bus so that passengers could enter on every door of the bus instead of just at the front, enabling the wheelchair lifts to be employed more effectively and faster. It would mean improving our streets, right? Making them safer, making sidewalks more accessible and safe for pedestrians and for wheelchairs. It would mean implementing dedicated bus lanes so that buses could operate alongside traffic instead of constantly being stuck inside of it. Better buses for people with disabilities in New York City would mean better buses for all New Yorkers, period. It's as simple as that. But while we can improve the bus, we can make subway elevators a reality, there are many New Yorkers who simply cannot access these types of transportation because of their functional or limited mobility. And for those New Yorkers, there's a program called Paratransit. In New York City, it's called Access-a-Ride. That's mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 to provide service to riders who cannot use subways or buses, right? Paratransit is the thing. But unfortunately, this is an unfunded mandate by the Americans with Disabilities Act, so there's no federal funding going towards these programs, and that leaves the service typically to be less than desirable. So I want to take you on a fake Access-a-Ride journey. This is like a typical experience that you may have in a brokered vehicle on Access-a-Ride. So you're waiting outside for up to 30 minutes for your Access-a-Ride vehicle to arrive. It's a trip that you had to have booked 24 hours in advance and by phone only. You get into the car and drive around for another hour or so, picking up other passengers to carpool with before you even get out onto your journey. You pay with cash and cash only. You start to head out on your trip. You've been driving around for an hour. You ask your driver, where am I going? When can I expect to get there? And the driver doesn't answer you because they simply don't have to. There's no requirement for them to do so. And then you arrive at your location up to 3 hours late, typically missing whatever important appointment or meeting that you had at work for sure. This is a typical Access-a-Ride experience. And this costs a lot of money to New Yorkers. This program costs $500 million a year to run the way that it does. And it's only growing and becoming increasingly expensive. And that's because more and more New Yorkers are dependent on accessible transportation, especially as they age. So there's really no incentive for the program to improve, because if the program improves, it costs more money. And if it costs more money, more people will want to use it. And if more people want to use it, the system can't handle that mass of people. So how can we improve Access-a-Ride? How can we improve paratransit systems? Like I said, we're sending rockets to Mars, right? We're using technology to improve how we get to where we want to go. So certainly technology can be used to implement solutions to this major problem of paratransit. And it's not technology that we need to develop, it's technology that's in our phones right now, right? SMS messaging, ride-hailing apps, car-sharing programs, these are the types of technologies that we can use to implement to make Access-a-Ride more user-friendly, more reliable, and accountable to riders, right? Enabling riders to book a ride less than 24 hours in advance when they need to go somewhere, freeing them from the confines of a very narrow pickup window. We could use GPS technology in our cars, which we're not doing currently, so that riders could know where they are, where they're going, and what time they're going to get there. It would be better experience entirely. But how would all New Yorkers benefit from improving paratransit? What is the incentive for all New Yorkers to invest in improving this program? Well, I think it's pretty safe to say that all New Yorkers will experience disability at some point in their life, right? Some of us are born into it. Some of us enter in and out of it throughout our lives. Many of us enter into it by age, right? This is an inevitability. And by denying that we will enter into this and denying improvements to things like paratransit, we're simply betting against ourselves, right? I think it's much better to embrace disability with wide open arms than to ignore and shun its inevitability completely. So there's no silver bullet here, right? There's no one simple solution to making transit more accessible. We need all of our systems to be working together to open up transportation for everybody. And we need to count on engineers. We need to count on developers, on policymakers, on transit agencies to incorporate design, to incorporate mobility into the way that they're building their transit systems. Because a transit system that benefits people with limited mobility, with disability, is a transit system that benefits us all. It's a better transit system, as simple as that. Transit and mobility is freedom, right? Having access to transportation, whether that's your car, a train, a bus, a rocket ship to Mars, it enables us to get where we want to go, right? It keeps us from being stuck in the same place. Mass transit is the lifeblood of our cities. It connects us to our schools, to our jobs. It gets us to our best friends' birthday parties, to our libraries, to our parks, right? It gets us out into the world. But more importantly, mass transit connects us all to each other, right? We're individuals traveling together in this shared space. And when we deny a group of people that experience, that collective experience that we all get, that mobility freedom, we're denying their existence or their right to have that freedom. So I love that I live in a world where the thought of going to Mars seems perceivable, but I want us all to get there, and I want us to get there together. Thank you.